Hey, everybody. Great to have you here. Mary Hunt at the Water Office. We'll be starting at the top of the hour, so uh, get your cup of tea or whatever you want and make yourselves comfortable. We're in for a great ride with Jennifer Rycenga today. I can assure you.
Mhm.
That I can assure you.
Hello, friends, old and new. Good to see you.
There's Diane New.
Yeah, I know you.
Hello,
Rosemary Hanley
Jennifer.
from Peterborough.
Oh,
Murray Hogarty from New Jersey. Virginia Day, currently
yeah.
Connecticut, right, Virginia?
Yes, Jennifer, remember I worked with your mother.
Yes,
Oh.
I do remember this. I will tell her
What?
she is doing well. She's 98 and
Oh, my.
she's in a nursing home, but she is still 100% mentally intact.
She's organized.
And I do think that, yeah, she's organizing the nursing home. And sometimes I do think her rage against current administration helps keep her alive and sharp.
Well, give her my love. We were at St. Vincent's together.
I do remember that, and she will be thrilled. We were going through the sort of alumni list of St. Day, and of course, so many of your colleagues are no longer with us.
Yes.
But remembers all of you fondly, and she will be absolutely delighted.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Well, now this thrills me that Virginia Day, who's a wonderful stalwart water person, knows Dolores.
Yeah.
Dolores is to whom the book is dedicated, I might add.
Oh.
To whom the book is dedicated.
I am also a big fan of her, Jenny. Please give her my love.
I will do that. Yeah,
Great to
Lori
see
is a college buddy of mine who also knows my mom, and her mom also was an extraordinary person, and pleasure
Yeah, I
to know
wonder
her.
if your mom might be on today. I thought she might join us, but
I wanted to try to do that, but with Peggy being injured and my not being well, there was no safe way to get one
Yeah.
of us there with a TV.
well, I can assure you that that this part of the recording will be Wed and Magdalena. We have to remember this. This part of the recording will start things with the full intention that Dolores Rycenga would have our greetings from these wonderful water people. How random is that? It's great. Great. I hope she's having a beer tonight. Tell her I said so.
Okay,
Like
I'll make
gin
sure.
and tonic.
Yeah,
Gin and tonic.
or
Well,
gin
this
and
is
tonic.
person.
That's her go-to.
Yeah. So good afternoon, folks. I'm going to get us started. Mary Hunt here at the Water Office. We're just having good conversation about Jennifer's mother, Dolores, whom some of these folks know. And I can assure you, I have only met her once or twice, but she's unforgettable and a force of nature. And I'll say a little bit more about her later because I think she's had a big influence on you, Jennifer. So this is the Water Talk, and it is Jennifer Rycenga on March 10th, 2025. I'm sorry, March 12th, 2025. Have I got my date wrong here? I want us to take the time today to really appreciate the situation that we're in as a world. I'm sorry, on March the 12th, a situation we're in as a world, and to reverence the fact that we take this time to be together, to really spend time looking at the examples of people who have come before us, but also making very clear what it is that we want this work to be about in our daily lives. So welcome from Water in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm here with my co-director, colleague, friend, partner, Diane New, and our German interns, Magdalena and Wed, who come to us from the Irene program in Germany and the Church of the Brethren Voluntary Service Program here in the U.S. So a hearty welcome to all of you as we continue our 25 programs, and a special word of welcome to those of you who are new to water. I hope you feel at home. We are in for a pedagogical treat today with Jennifer Rycenga, author of Schooling the Nation, The Success of the Canterbury Academy for Black Women. And this is published by University of Illinois Press. I will be shamelessly hawking it throughout the hour because I think that it's a really important read. And we're really fortunate to have Jennifer with us. We here at Water begin our programs with the land acknowledgement. We've incorporated this into all of our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we do to do more of, given the systemic injustice Indigenous and other people of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. Waters on the indigenous land of Silver Spring, Maryland, that is a traditional and contemporary home of Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward indigenous people and other people of color that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it, make reparations for the genocide involved. Waters' work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed at bringing about social justice. So let us consider for a collective quiet moment the Native people on whose land you sit. Please feel free to put their names in the chat as a way of recognizing them if you wish. Thank you. We'll just take a moment of silence. Thank you. Waters' work brings feminist and womanist spiritual values and intellectual work to the service of social change. Our hope is that by socializing the resources of feminist and womanist work in religion, we spread tools and energy for justice. In light of the current U.S. administration's disruptive, chaotic, and global shaking politics, I could say more, it is more crucial than ever that we create opportunities like this for learning and conversation. You can be sure that Water will protect these spaces and that Water will expand these spaces in the months ahead, come what may. Feel free to join us, suggest topics, speakers, books we might fruitfully explore, because doing this work is resistance. Let me say something about our format. I'm going to introduce Jennifer and her theme, and then Jennifer will share her book in which she tells the story of intersectional work by diverse people to bring about education for Black women. Then the floor will be open for questions and answers for discussion until 2 o'clock Eastern Time, when we will close officially, though the Zoom will remain open for conversation as long as people wish. We invite you to sit back, listen, and enjoy. Jennifer has notes and PowerPoint. We'll have some notes. Everything will be on our website shortly with the video of this session. So you can go back to this, you can share it with others. We encourage you to use it in your communities, in your groups. Go to our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and you will find shortly, in a couple of days, you will find the notes and the link to the video for this program. Again, feel free to use these resources, continue the conversation among your colleagues. It's that important. But for now, please mute your audio so that Jennifer and I are the only ones who are open at this point. That'll give us a good, clear line so that we can use this in a very productive way. Let me begin by introducing Jennifer Rycenga. I have already shown the book once. I will show it again. Schooling the Nation, the Successes of the Canterbury Academy for Black Women. The warmest water welcome to you, Jennifer, my longtime friend and colleague. Dr. Rycenga is the author of this book, University of Illinois Press. She is Professor Emerita in the Humanities Department at San José State University. Her scholarly work has focused on the abolitionist movement, exploring the lives and work of Black and white abolitionists engaged in anti-racism work, and the many networks of families and friends involved in the struggles against slavery and injustice. Believe me, this book is a page-turner. The story unfolds through a complex set of relationships, commitments, and in some instances, betrayals. But the outcome is clear. Despite the fact that the Canterbury Academy was short-lived, it was a remarkable and lasting success for reasons that Jennifer will explain. This is due in large measure to the person and persistence of Prudence Crandall, but it could not have existed without many other players of several races and genders. But I'll leave the telling to the expert, Jennifer. The focus today is on Philosophia, and I love the pronunciation. Is it Philosophia with the accent?
Or Philosophia. Loving so Philosophia.
Philosophia. And you'll understand that this comes from our colleague Emily Culpepper in its original meaning. And the subtitle is Women Inspiring and Encouraging One Another, of which the Canterbury School is one good example. Jennifer, in my mind, is the postmodern equivalent of a Renaissance woman. Her first studies were in music, with bachelor and master's degrees from Yale and University of Toronto, respectively. Then she did a master's in theology at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. the state where the Canterbury Academy for Black Women was founded. I delight in the fact, Jennifer, that you got your doctorate as I did, although I was 10 years ahead of you, from the Graduate Theological Union in conjunction with the University of California, Berkeley. Yours was in religion and music in 1992. Jennifer has taught at San José State University from 1995 to 2023, recently retired. It's my delight to see the GTU connection from the fact that so many of us GTU people have gone on to creative, unique, and in your case, amazing careers. We'll meet another one here at Water next month, Victoria Rue, a playwright, theologian, and priest, also a GTU PhD. She'll be with us next month, and I'll talk about that later. But in a recent interview in the GTU publication, Jennifer spoke with deep delight about the library. And I spent so much time in the library, some people thought I didn't have a house. You loved it. And Jennifer said, and I love this line, "If there is a heaven, it will surely be a library." I'm with you. Jennifer's also a longtime bird watcher with deep dedication to the well-being of the species she spots. She's also dedicated to plant life, especially lichens, composite organisms made up of fungi and algae and God knows what else, but Jennifer knows. Her expertise in the scholarly world includes published work in feminist musicology and global feminism, each with an edited anthology. And she co-authored the Mary Daly Reader with another postmodern Renaissance woman, Linda Barafaldi. It was published by New York University Press in 2017, and I highly recommend it. Mary Daly continues to influence contemporary thought. There's a soon-to-be-released, newly found, unpublished manuscript by Daly, with commentaries by Daly scholars, including Jennifer. I'm sure we'll be doing a water talk on that book. Jennifer lives in Rochester, New York with her wonderful wife, Peggy, to whom we send healing blessings today. She's had some health issues. And not far from her incomparable mother, Dolores, known as the family's moral compass, to whom Jennifer dedicated this book. Welcome, Jennifer. We're delighted to learn from a great teacher today. Welcome to Water.
Well, thank you very much. I am not sure I can go on after that, but thank you. And I just want to say about the current moment in our shared history that my mother and I had a running gag, because this book took me a long time to write. And each year she would say, "Are you going to finish the book this year?" I would say, I'm certainly trying to, Mom. And she would say, "It's never been more needed than now." And it turns out that now that it's been published, she was right all along. It's never been more needed than now. And while I am delighted that Mary Hunt, who, by the way, is always ahead of me, that Mary Hunt has been urging you to purchase the book. But let me just say, I also urge you to share the story with other people, make sure they know about it. Prudence Crandall is the official state heroine of Connecticut. We have something on which we can build. She's in the curriculum in Connecticut. She ought to be nationwide. So share the story, share the book if you do buy it. It's not about the purchasing of the book so much as it's about keeping alive the story of America's actual revolutionary movements that have happened in the past, of which the abolitionists are one. So I refer to it as America's Canterbury Tale, and obviously that's a pun just waiting to be used. But remember that the Canterbury Tales are about religious pilgrims. And in a way, the students in Canterbury and the teachers and all of the allies who came to their support were pilgrims on the way to a better America, on their way to an America that would actually include women's voices and men's voices, Black voices and white voices. So that is a major way of thinking about the Canterbury Tale as more than just idle cleverness. Canterbury is an important story because of the Philosophia in it. Women spark other women. And they are able to do this across lines of race, which has been such a fault line in our feminist history. Women then spark men to take action because at this time, 1833, women couldn't do certain things in public. They didn't have control of the press or of the law courts. And then we see women and men, Black and white, striving together. And they're doing all of this without any reasonable hope at that moment of electoral success, and without vast resources of money and influence. So I have been very insistent, as I know others have, that right now we need to keep saying diversity, equity, and inclusion. Say all three words out loud. Don't let them turn it into an abstraction. The story of Canterbury is one of diversity, equity, and inclusion in historic reality, and it was conducted by the woke people of their time period. And this is why we need to know it. We have ancestors. So Canterbury comes very early in what's called the immediate abolition movement from 1831, which I'm going to deal with in just a moment, through its life as a school, which ends in September of 1834. We have here what Karl Marx called new forces and new passions that arise from within society. And we are seeing that happening again in our own time. So in 1831, William Lloyd Garrison famously launched the immediate abolition newspaper, The Liberator, a real example of revolutionary journalism on January 1st. What is less reported and less known is that a week later in his second issue, he published the very important intellectual effort of a recently deceased Black man, David Walker, who had written an appeal saying that the slaves had every right to rebel and to engage in combat with those who were illegally owning them. And even though Garrison didn't quite agree with everything Walker said, he recognized that this was an important document. And that's a key moment in anti-racist history. We don't have to agree with each other to respect each other and learn from each other. A few months later, one of the most prominent white women intellectuals of the time, Lydia Maria Child, a novelist, and also a domestic guru of the Martha Stewart type, joined the abolitionist movement, and she compared it to the Pentecost. She said it was as if tongues of flame descended into us to be able to speak the truth. That same year, Nat Turner, who was a very intelligent enslaved Black man in Virginia, led what was probably the best planned slave uprising before it was defeated by white militias. And while his movement was defeated, he was still on the lam when a month later, a Black woman, Maria Stewart, walked into the offices of William Lloyd Garrison at the Liberator and said, I would like you to publish some religious writings of mine, which turned out to be religious, but religious as in inspiring us to act boldly on issues of class and race. And in there, she calls for the establishment of a high school for Black women. And from that cauldron, a young teenage woman, Mariah Davis, a Black woman in Boston, moved to Canterbury, Connecticut. There was one other event, though, in 1831, which was a failure. And I think right now in these times, we have to be honest about when there are failures as well. There was an attempt by Black and white abolitionist men to set up a college for men, Black men, in New Haven, Connecticut. And they thought that this would be easy. And instead, their idea of a Black college was defeated in an open vote, 700-4. I don't think I'm stepping out of class to call that a defeat. This has been documented in terms of the cost, what it meant, and what we lost by not having the first HBCU be in the North. And I've asked Magdalena and Wed if they can put in the chat the link to the films about this college, which I urge you to view if you hadn't heard of this before. This marked the high water level for what was called the colonization movement, which was the idea that free Black people should be sent back to Africa, regardless of whether they had been there or not. This is the genesis of Liberia and Sierra Leone from the British side. So sometime late 1831-32, Mariah Davis moves to Canterbury, Connecticut. And this is in the northeast corner of Connecticut. It's not the best known part of the state. It goes by those nicknames, the land of steady habits especially. But there were some free Black populations in this area because of seafaring populations in Norwich and New London, which was a major port. And this is where the magic happens. Maria Davis had moved from Boston to Canterbury because her fiance lived in Canterbury. His name was Charles Harris. Charles Harris's father, William Harris, was the agent for the Liberator. And as a result, Maria Davis had access to copies of the Liberator. She was hired to be the household helper for Prudence Crandall, who was running a select academy for women, which at that time was simply assumed to mean white women and no one else. No one had to state it. It was the unmarked case. So Maria Davis starts providing Crandall with copies of the Liberator. We do not know if this was active or passive, if she simply was saying, you know, you should read this, or if she just left copies around discreetly. But let us for a moment consider the bravery of a teenage woman, a Black woman in her first job, most likely, bringing an incendiary paper to her white employer. She must have sensed that Crandall was actually a human being. In other words, she was vetting her. And Crandall responded to the Liberator, and she said, I saw in its pages the unjust way in which African Americans were treated. So now that Maria Davis sees that her hunch about Crandall was correct, she encourages her future sister-in-law, Sarah Harris, to ask if she could be admitted to the school. Sarah Harris wanted to become a teacher herself. She went and asked Crandall, and Crandall didn't answer right away. But Harris persisted, and finally Crandall decided to take action. And the action that she took was an interesting one that shows how effortlessly, and I think quite creatively, Crandall combined her birthright Quaker heritage with her newfound Baptist Second Great Awakening conversion. She did a talismanic biblical reading, opening the Bible randomly, and she opened to Ecclesiastes 4:1. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Believe me, it is quite out of character for me to suggest that you read Ecclesiastes, but I think that passage tells us a lot about what we're supposed to be doing too. And so Crandall read this as saying she should admit Sarah Harris, which she did, and she stood by Sarah Harris no matter who told her that she should dismiss her. And so we have the Philosophia. These three women spark each other. And what do they spark each other about? Their minds. And not just their minds, but the mind and heart together, the fullness of humanity. And once that flame is lit, it sparks the women further. It sparks them to make transformative changes that could actually create a new country. And I was given this wonderful phrase by my friend Lou Turner, that this was a luminous moment. Sarah, Mariah, and Prudence threw a stone into a pool of largely white complacency around them that resulted in more ripples than the other scholars who've looked at Crandall were able to document. And if you do read the book, it presents a microscopic look at a social movement near its inception, and one that would take over 30 years to achieve its first goal of ending slavery, and its second goal of ending racism has fallen to us to complete. So Davis, Harris, and Crandall use their dialogue and their human relationship to create actual change. First, they have an integrated school, then advanced schooling for Black women. And I want to stress advanced schooling. This was not about learning ABCs. This was the equivalent of a high school, and it was likely at the level of a junior college or an AP high school course level. And this was before any colleges were open to women. So it was the highest level of education open to women. They use persistence to alter the course of history. And they embody reason They're furthering reason, and they're using their minds to push into a world that had not heretofore been actualized. That's actual change. And it doesn't end there, because what those three women started, Crandall now realizes, because the white parents in her neighborhood object to this radical change to the school of having a Black woman there as well. Crandall says, well, maybe there's enough African-American students, since they actually really want education, maybe there's enough of them in the Northeast that I could run my school from them. And so she writes to William Lloyd Garrison and says, do you think there would be enough students? And he says, let's talk about it. She goes up to Boston. He also senses that she is trustworthy. He gives her his whole list of allies in Providence, New Haven, and New York City. And with that, she starts traveling. She starts in Providence, Rhode Island, where she meets with a Black woman, Elizabeth Hammond, who was running a boarding house. She was recently widowed. For obvious reasons, respectability is important for a boarding house manager. And so it was a very important leap that Elizabeth Hammond not only trusted Crandall enough to introduce her to other Black parents in Providence, but she sent two of her own daughters to the school. And many other students came from Providence as well. Then, even more daringly, Prudence Crandall, who at this point is about 30 years old, single, makes a trip by herself to New York City, where she's meeting with Black men, in particular, all the religious leaders of Black New York City, who also trust her enough to send their parishioners' daughters to be in her school. And this was the result. This is the advertisement for Crandall's school in April of 1833. She says that her school will be open for the reception of young ladies and little misses of color. That might sound patronizing to us, but in the language of 1833, ladies and misses was reserved for white women. It was not used for working class white women, nor for any African American woman. And so not only does Crandall give them these titles, but she also is giving it to them before she has met them. She recognizes them as her equals. They don't have to prove it to her. And then follows the remarkable list of endorsers. Nobody's race on that list is specified. The names arranged by location, not by race. And every Black man on that list has a title, either Reverend or Mr. And Mr. too is a form of respect that was rarely accorded to Black men. And so now we can see an interracial male network made visible for what? The cause of Black women's higher education. And that should be a fact of our shared history that we know. If you didn't know, it's not your fault. You're just the victim of cover-up. There are, of course, no women endorsers. That wasn't allowed at the time. But I have fun with history. And so I imagined a list of women endorsers with the criteria I say, that they had to be already active at the time of Crandall's school with some connection to it in the historical record. And I came up with 16 women who could have had their names on that list. It's kind of remarkable. It shows that already we had coalescing a set of thinkers and activists from within both the white and Black women's communities. And that initial ripple sparks out from Black women to white women. The Philosophia of woman-generated knowledge is how Emily Culpepper defines it. And then it goes out to other African-American parents, their families, and the students themselves. And then that male abolitionist network was activated. It grew from its original base in New Haven and now had many more people attached. I don't belong, as you can probably tell, to the school of PowerPoint that says you shouldn't put too much information on one slide. But I'm assuming you will use your best conference manners and read about how all of these people create networks, much as we found in the introduction today of various networks that connect us all. The school lasted for a year and a half. It was under constant assault. There were legal attempts to close it. There were vigilante attempts to close it. There was constant harassment. But somehow those women who were students and their teachers were able to balance their work in amplifying the cause of abolition while also buying themselves enough time to actually gain the education they sought. And that included protecting each other. There's nothing worse to give a mob that intends to harass you than your name. And so they never revealed each other's names. And in all their publications, we don't know which student wrote which thing because that was simply not how it was done. They knew to protect each other. The names we have are from court documents, memoirs, obituaries, letters after the fact. This is the list of students, and it's grown considerably since I started researching this because more were found. And it wasn't me alone by any means. Many fine scholars have contributed to growing this list. But I put it up here because those of you who enjoy messing around on Ancestry.com or other now searchable newspapers, these are the names we're looking for. And let us be good feminist thinkers for a moment and recognize how difficult it is to track African American names, first of all, because they weren't always treated with respect in official records. And many of their churches suffered violence, and so church records are missing. And then these are teenage women, which means they might be using their nickname and their last name might change later. So it's almost like three-dimensional chess trying to find some of these women, but they're out there and I'm determined to go on. And here's what two of those women said in 1833. Sarah Harris wrote a letter to one of her sisters, and she said, "Our cause will be the means of arousing the nations to their duty with respect to the condition of our colored population and be the means of allaying the prejudice of Americans." I wish she had been right about that allaying the prejudice of Americans. It's our work to continue it. And Crandall indicates her persistence in that quote that has biblical echoes. And what are the students learning? In addition to the regular subjects, they are reading the abolitionist press. This work, for instance, which is a hallmark of anti-racist history. William Lloyd Garrison wrote half a book explaining why colonization was a fraud, and then gave the other half of the book over to all of the Black men in convention who had been arguing against colonization for 15 years before William Lloyd Garrison woke up. Every single student knew some of the authors in the second half of this book. Think about that. They're reading about their own struggle and that of their parents and friends. They're studying explicitly the most recent philosophy of nonviolence through an English linen draper philosopher known as Jonathan Diamond. And they participate in the arguments for their own citizenship and right to education, which were literally put on trial. A law was passed called the Black Law that made it illegal to harbor out-of-state Blacks for purposes of education. Crandall was arrested under that law, and she spent a night in jail. Again, I'm going to leave you to your best conference manners to read this. But my last line is how she reached out to a Black man, her white male allies, a Black woman, and a white woman in that night in jail. She was envisioning and actualizing a different kind of America in that moment. But the trials themselves, there were 4 of them. In the life of a school that lasted only a year and a half, they had 4 different moments of litigious torture, frankly. The ones that are highlighted here in black background were the ones where we have ample evidence that the students spoke as witnesses. And again, they're in double jeopardy. They're Black women and they're teenagers. And the cases where their voices were heard were decided in their favor. That's how good they were. That's how bold they were. But as this picture shows, we are often given the spectacle of as if Crandall is the only one who's a martyr here. We've got to put the Black women back in the situation. The students were being set up to damage their own education, to damage their own friends and allies, and to question their own citizenship. It was written into the law. Dare I say, the cruelty was the point. It wasn't a bug, it was a feature of this law. And these women won the day. They even won over the reporter from the Status Quo Connecticut Post, who showed up and said you would have a hard time finding a group of young women who were as brave and as well-spoken as these women were. And then there was the vigilante violence that was constant. The voice of a student here: the Canterburyans are savage. They will not sell Miss Crandall an article at their shops. My ride from Hartford to Brooklyn was very unpleasant, being made up of blackguards. I came on foot from here to Brooklyn, but the happiness I enjoy here pays me for all. The place is delightful. All that is wanting to complete the place is civilized men. Last evening, the news reached us that the new law had passed. The bell rang and a cannon was fired for half an hour. Where is justice? In the midst of all this, Miss Crandall is unmoved. When we walk out, horns are blown and pistols fired. And yet these women were learning. The vigilante violence escalated. Students were refused medical assistance. An arson fire was set. That was one of the trials where the students won the day by defending a black man who the whites of the Canterbury were trying to railroad. And this is why I have that black and white cat there. A black and white cat was butchered and placed over the fence as a warning. This is the black and white cat of my late mother-in-law, Millie, who came into the room as I was writing that section, apparently knowing what had happened to his ancestor. And the students responded with nonviolence. I'm just going to skip to the end here. You are aware that ever since we have been under Miss Crandall's instructions, it has been her utmost care to persuade us not to indulge angry feelings towards our enemies. With unceasing and untiring earnestness has she pled with us to forgive them. And now let us try to abide by her counsel and feel at peace with all men. And I just want to say, as many of us are thinking about nonviolent responses right now to what is happening, nonviolence is difficult. The tension in that student's writing is obvious. And indeed, one of the Canterbury students, Julia Williams, later marries Henry Highland Garnet, possibly the Malcolm X of the 19th century. He and his family had self-liberated from slavery at great risk of their own lives. And he wrote a speech in 1843 in which he said that the slaves had every right to rebel. And when a white woman took him to task for that and said, oh, some white man must have written that for you, he was incensed. And he said, only one person read that speech before I gave it, and that was my wife, Julia Williams. And so she apparently was no longer living a strictly nonviolent philosophy. But isn't that part of what education is really about? Critical thinking skills and being able to develop as history moves and changes. The school was destroyed in September of 1834 with a particularly violent attack that broke every window and clearly endangered the lives of the students. But that's not the end. Because what we have here is starting from a moment of women sharing their wisdom, Philosophia. We don't get a single hero. This isn't only about Prudence Crandall. I love her dearly, but she never told the story that way. She always credited Mariah Davis and Sarah Harris. We don't need another white savior. We need community. Canterbury became a force multiplier of many heroes. It was multidimensional. It was prismatic. It was what we need now, a social movement. And you could see that from the women on the cover. Sarah Harris, the original student, goes on to become an abolitionist activist. Her house in Rhode Island was a regular stopping point for both Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, both of whom she had on her Christmas card list. The woman in the middle, Maricha Lyons, was the niece of a student at the school, and she ends up writing the first capsule biographies of Sarah Harris and another student, Elizabeth Brown Smith. And then on the right, Mary Harris, a younger sister of Sarah Harris, she and her husband, an educator, Pelham Williams, go down to New Orleans as soon as the Union has secured New Orleans and ended slavery there. And they start building up the HBCU that was originally known as Straight University right then and there. And because of the miracle of all of the documents that are now online, I was able to trace out how these students' descendants all had remarkable records of achievement in a variety of fields. My favorite being this one, Fritz Pollard Jr., a descendant of the student Amy Fenner, who was a track and field star who was on the same team with Jesse Owen in the 1936 Olympics, the one where Hitler was trying to prove white supremacy, and instead, well, Jesse Owens happened. But so did Fritz Pollard Jr., who got a bronze in one of the events where Owens took the gold. And so a descendant of the Canterbury School was there to give the proverbial middle finger to Adolf Hitler. And what about Crandall herself? Well, for this audience, she followed a religious trajectory not unlike what we feminists have seen. She goes from being a birthright Quaker to joining the Baptists at just the right moment because her school students would be prohibited from going to the Congregationalist church, and her Baptist church welcomed them and even said, you don't need to sit in the gallery, come right here to the front row, which was a big deal in those days. She drifts away from the Baptist because she made a big mistake. She married a Baptist minister who was a tyrannical kind of guy and attempted to restrict her reading, which he failed in, I'm happy to say. But it turns out he had some in-laws who were Universalists, and she'd worked with some Unitarians. And so she engaged with them and kept reading widely. Like many other progressive women of the time, she became a renowned advocate of spiritualism. This book was written by one of her acolytes, who studied with her in Kansas in her final years. And then in her final illness, she consults a Christian Science healer. She did not sit still spiritually. And I think this was a beautiful letter to the editor that she wrote to attack an evangelical preacher. She says, how dare you stand and with all the pathos and eloquence of which you are capable, tell an audience of immortal souls that a book containing many thousand acknowledged errors is the word of God when it sanctions war, slavery, and polygamy, which you know it does, and that if they do not believe what you think is taught in that book, that an endless hell will be their portion in a future state of existence as long as God himself endures? With one fell swoop, you sent us all to hell. Not literal hellfire and brimstone to burn souls, but into the hell of despair of God's love without the possibility of a change, an eternal damnation than which it never entered the human mind to conceive anything more humanly atrocious. It is the acme of diabolical malice which you say is displayed by the Creator, whom we are asked at the same time to consider a being of boundless love and mercy. I just hope I'm writing like that when I'm 84 too. And then in her final letter to Garrison's children, we can see her spirit and her anti-racist activism coming together. She says, it is a matter of great thankfulness that you have the ability to accomplish so much good as you have done in writing the life of your dear father, William Lloyd Garrison, whose deeds of love while on earth turned so many to righteousness. And now in spirit life, he has the ability to teach more precious souls the way of holiness and happiness than he ever did while in the physical form, is my full belief. Allow me to return my sincere thanks. I am deeply interested in the progress of the colored people in every moral and intellectual growth. I take some paper all the time edited by colored men that I can learn what they are doing for themselves. And I put it to you, how many 86-year-old white women in Kansas right now are reading the Black press? And that's why I care so much about this woman. And that's why I'm so grateful to you for listening to me. And I hope you'll join me in going out and changing the world. Thank you.
Wonderful, and everything I expected and a bit more. I stand by my introduction. I exaggerated not one syllable. Marvelous, 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 Jennifer. What a story, and so well told. We'll be sorting this out, the threads of it, for generations to come with this very helpful, very accessibly written, and I'm going to add beautifully written book, Schooling the Nation, the Success of the Canterbury Female Academy. So while it is, in fact, the story that's important, it is in this book, and it now has a place in intellectual history. So we are in your debt. I want to open now for questions and discussion. Please use the raise hands button, which is part of the React button at the bottom, and just raise your hand so that, as I have just done, and then lower your hand so that we can hear from people who would like to make comments on this. I've got lots of questions, but I want to open it up first for everybody so that we can hear some reactions, not just questions, but reactions. If this story is new to you, and it was new to me as I read the book, I had some bits and pieces of the story, but the way you've put it together, Jennifer, the way you've drawn and the threads of it together, both to tell the story, but also to point where it leads us now, I think will evoke some reactions from people. So the floor is open. Let's have conversation. Again, with deep thanks to you. Who would like to be first? Comment, reaction, question?
I just want to add one thing that I forgot, which is I know we may have some friends here from Canada. And if that is the case, I just want to say, first of all, my apologies, and we're doing what we can. But secondly, one of Crandall's students was Mary Elizabeth Miles Bibb, who, with her husband Henry Bibb, edited The Voice of the Fugitive, which is the first Afro-Canadian newspaper. And so a number of students had international impact. Julia Williams Garnett went to Jamaica and to England as well, and did some teaching there. So we're not limited to just looking at the United States here. There was a nascent internationalism. And in a previous time I showed this slide deck, someone pointed that out with The Liberator, said our country is the world, our countrymen are all mankind. And aside from that gendered language, that impulse is so important right now because the whole world is suffering this, and we're not the only country that's currently having a right-wing takeover.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to just point out as well as while you're thinking that in the chat, there are some more resources, including a link to Jennifer's Substack. So that's a good resource as well. And just to reaffirm that we will send everything to you from this presentation for your own use after we put it all together later in this week. I want to invite Rosemary Ganley from Peterborough, Ontario to make the first comment. Go ahead, Rosemary. Unmute, please.
Yeah. Well, I was just thrilled, Jennifer, to meet you and hear these ideas. And by the way, on behalf of Canadians, we accept your apology. We know we know of the dangers of this political leadership at this time and all the efforts you're making to get rid of it. So thank you. I just want to comment that how welcome it is to move out of polite society and use the terms black and white. I spent time in Jamaica, and Jamaicans relieved me of that politeness about never mentioning color, because they would self-describe as high brown or just medium brown as simply a descriptor of who they were referring to. And it really short-circuited all the questions you didn't ask, because it was upfront and it was self-identifying. And I found that so refreshing in your presentation.
Thank you.
With the formalities, and well, Jamaicans were very frank about everything physical. You know, but it was amusing and it was empowering. And thank you, Jennifer. I was thrilled.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rosemary. I wonder, Jennifer, if you could comment on other cases where you have seen this kind of black, white, female, male, now obviously expanding both of those categories, collaborations that have had such wide-reaching implications. Are there parallels that you can think of as an historian where people have collaborated in the kind of with a kind of effectiveness that's obvious here?
The obvious parallel is what happens at the end of the Civil War when Black and white men and women go from the North to teach in the South. And that's a collective struggle, very important. And I recommend Manisha Sinha's new book on Reconstruction, where she deals with this, but also, even more importantly, W.E.B. Du Bois in both Souls of Black Folk and in the Black Reconstruction in the South, singles this out as America's greatest moment. And the teachers who went, the white teachers who went to the South were socially ostracized from any contact with the white community where they were teaching in the South. Schoolhouses were commonly attacked, burned. There were some martyrs in this situation. There were some teachers who were killed. And we find both that there were a lot of free Blacks in the North who saw this as their moment. And what you're getting then is a lot of women in their 20s who are not yet married, but who had received an education and maybe watched their parents be a part of the abolitionist movement, both Black and white. And they see this as their moment. And what they do is they make public education a reality in the South. It hadn't been because, surprise, surprise, the South didn't want their people to be educated generally. They were happy for their upper class to be educated, but they didn't want education to be general. So the very existence of public education in the South is thanks to that movement. So again, I recommend Manisha Sinha and the two W.E.B. Du Bois volumes about that. And I would single out one example because she was a Rochester woman and one of the lesbian abolitionists who I hope to write about one day, and that's a woman named Sally Holly, who with her partner, Carolyn Putnam, went down to Virginia to run a school. And they were invited to attend an abolitionist reunion, which was basically to celebrate, hey, we ended slavery. And they wrote a letter back and said, excuse me, we're too busy fighting the slave power still, we can't make it. And it's a little bit harsh, but I think it was a necessary thing to say. And I appreciate that it was a pair of women who were doing that and saying that.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that, to that work of yours forthcoming. I'd like to move on to Donna, please. Go ahead, Donna.
Oh, you're still muted.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. I really, really, really appreciate the fact that you've added to the list of the commonly recognized Black women who were leaders, both before and after emancipation. Did the HBCU that was founded in New Orleans, was that Xavier University? Did that become Xavier?
I think it becomes Drexel.
Oh, Drexel.
I'd have to go double check, but I'm pretty sure it becomes Drexel.
Drexel.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess, in my experience, I spent 14 years ministering in an African-American parish, and I can attest to the leadership and the courage of the women who were leaders in that church today and still are. I mean, I think the many, many women in the Black community today are powerful leaders, and I so grateful for your ability to begin to raise up more names and the histories of those women. They're there. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for calling in particular. And I don't know if I can, yes, I can put my hand right on it. This is another, unfortunately with my background, I can't hold things up.
There it is.
This book charts a lot of the schools that were started by the American Missionary Association,
Mm-hmm.
abolitionist run group that really dedicated itself to education afterwards. And it is essentially an ongoing litany of strong Black women in the churches right up to the present day.
Right.
And I'm reminded of the title of the book that I know Barbara Smith was one of the co-editors of all the men, all the blacks are men, all the women are white, but some of us are brave. And calling out the inherent racism in a lot of the social change movements of the 60s. And this is, such an important example of that bravery. And when I first came to the story, 23 years ago, I thought I was going to write a biography of Prudence Crandall, and I quickly realized, wait a minute, this was all about Black women, and they don't get represented in the story. So, like, what's that about? It's like, well, it's pretty obvious what that's about, And so I had to change to basically write a biography of the school. But then, as I'm understanding where we are, where we're going in education and in terms of race and gender, it's like, we've got to tell this as a story of a movement, because indeed, so many of these students, at least 10, go on to be abolitionist activists. And one of the students stays in touch with Crandall and writes to her in 1877 about what's going on with Black and white women working together on suffrage in Washington, D.C. And I'm happy to reply to let you know, by the way, that Crandall was very active in women's suffrage. And this was the hotbed of women's suffrage somehow back then. And a law was passed that enabled women to vote in school board elections, and realized who she was, her village allowed her to vote first. And that was, again, very, she was in her mid-80s by then.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, go ahead. Let's see, that would be Lori first and then Katie, or Kathy. I'm sorry, Kathy.
That's good.
Lori and then Kathy.
I wanted to say how moving it was that you traced a lineage of passing down a teaching, a tradition, of a way of thinking, of working together across races and genders, and turned it into a history that's like both a spiritual and philosophical and religious tradition that can be passed down. And then you traced how it affected and influenced so many lives and turned into a movement. For me, that's very, very powerful, way more powerful than a story about one person. And just, it comes right into the modern era, especially with that story of the Olympics, what year was that? 1930?
36.
Yeah.
In Berlin.
Anyway, like all the stories you told of students who kept in touch and whose nieces or nephews or grandchildren were you can trace the effect in their lives. It doesn't end, when we die. The lives we touch can really be changed. So that was very, very uplifting. Also, the way that she was really an anti-racist. So many of the other abolitionists I've read about, that I've read about, were also afflicted with racism. And you talked about that in your other time. I mean, you can't expect that everybody is going to completely be able to excise from their insides, every trace of racism. And I understand that, and it's hard work and everything. So, but it's so remarkable that she really was an anti-racist.
I know we're coming up on time, but I just want to add, thank you for that the Black community always recognized her. And that was a thing that I was able to uncover that really hadn't been seen by previous scholars, that there was consistent support for her among educated African Americans well into the early 20th century. There was even a Prudence Crandall Literary Club for women in Chicago, for instance, and Crandall was in touch with them. And she said, if only I was well enough to visit, that'd be cool. I'd love to attend. So I don't think that kind of recognition is bestowed on everyone, just because people who helped out in the movement.
And also, like, Benjamin Franklin recognized that. He visited a school for Black children. He said, these children are just as smart, if not smarter, than the white children there. But I don't think he totally incorporated that into his whole social outlook. You know what I mean? Like, it's still remarkable, even that he did that. But for her, what she accomplished in being able to reinvent herself or invent herself, out of whole cloth is amazing.
Thanks so much. Let's turn to Kathy, and then I'll make the announcements, and we'll pick up the conversation after the top of the hour, as some people will have to leave. Kathy, go ahead, please. Welcome.
I loved that image of the prism, where one thought is just broken open into so many colors or facets. And so I'm grateful for education like you're giving us now, so we can interrupt conversations that are not quite correct with this, even this little conversation today. So important it's been. And we can kind of amplify your research through our understanding and just, if nothing else, disrupt conversations that are just inaccurate. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I sometimes my colleagues tease me. I use the word prismatic so much, but a good friend of mine pointed out I may have reached the age when we see things prismatically. So
Great term.
yeah.
Wonderful. I'm going to pick up after the announcements. I'm going to pick up with a question, Jennifer, about really bringing it right home, because it's not lost on me that today the Department of Education in the Washington area has been asked, I guess around the country, people have been asked to stay at home so that the dastardly deeds can be done, and half of them will be fired by tomorrow. I want to pick up on that in a moment, but first I'm going to make the announcements. And the first one, of course, is to thank you heartily, not only for this wonderful book, but for the really important model of pedagogy that you've provided today. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for the important conversation. We'll be sure that you get a link to the video and to the notes. Yes, we are doing our work, Jennifer. Water programs are free. They're open to everybody. The donations are welcome, of course, but we try to socialize resources. That's our effort. So those who can donate do, and they do so very generously, so that we can make all water programs available to everyone without charge. Why? Because we at Water believe that if we share, among us, there's enough. If we share, among us, there's enough. And Jennifer has shared very graciously today, and among us, there's plenty, not only to receive her sharing, but to take it well beyond these parameters. So thanks to Jennifer Rycenga and all of you who joined us. The Zoom will remain open now for conversation. I wish you power, I wish you solidarity, and I wish you good company in these terrible times. Thank you from Water. Jennifer, I hope you can hang out for a few minutes, but I want to know.
I certainly can.
Yeah, I want to know that, as diversity and equity and inclusion is destroyed as a thing, and the Department of Education is decimated, who are some of the historic and heroic educators who you see as defying it at this point? I'm hard pressed to think of many, but I see Columbia University losing $400 million in federal funding, and so many other examples coming forward of institutions that will pay a very steep price. How can we, in sharing this story that you've told us today, how can we encourage and support and lift up people who are doing this work now?
It's a great question. I
don't expect an answer in that sense.
No, I can't. Yeah,
I
don't have the power to save the Department of Education at this point. But what I will say is that teaching skills are transferable to many different situations. And I'm thinking here about one of Mary Daly's favorite examples, which was the hedge schools in Ireland, when the Protestant powers that be would not allow for teaching of the Irish Catholics. And so instead people would meet out by the hedge to learn. And we know that there were similar practices among African Americans, where if an African American who was enslaved had gained literacy, they would share those skills with others. And so I think part of it is that, which is that those of us who are able financially to give away our learning should be doing it right now. Fahrenheit 451 comes to mind as well. That being said, I do mention in the book Frantz Fanon's analysis that intellectuals often become cowardly at the worst moment, and often fail. And I was recently back in California, where I had taught for so many years, to give my talks there. And so I took aside colleagues of mine from Berkeley and San Jose State and Stanford, and I said, what do you think is the reaction of your administration? And the answer for all three of those institutions was, we're just trying to lay low and not get noticed. And I'm thinking, what world are you living in? We're talking about the leading universities in the Bay Area. Don't you think that's on their radar? You know, it's like, that is not going to work. It's absolutely, it's crucial right now to be bold and to positively claim and not be defensive about what we have been teaching. And I know I'm in a very safe position to say that. And I am more than willing to spend every ounce of privilege I have to enable other people to, to get on with the work. When it comes to the institutions, I think we do have to complain and be persistent about our complaints of what's going on. I'm not at all sure that the Democrats are the answer. I, in fact, am deeply skeptical that they are, but I think that we can give them a lot of rhetorical kicks and we can embarrass them a lot. And last night, finally, I saw them doing something creative. And I practically leapt out of my chair with glee, which is they're holding town hall meetings where the Republicans won't. That was finally something new. And I was describing it this morning to Peggy. I said, if you had been a nominee who lost to a Republican, you're the Democrat, you're saying I was willing to be a public servant. So guess what? Maybe I am a public servant. Because I was willing to be one, so I still am. So I'm willing to speak up. And we need that kind of creativity, but frankly, I think it's up to us. What I'm worried about, because I'm married to a former special ed teacher, is what's going to happen to special ed and what's going to happen to the scholarships. And I did see one graduate student in the sciences who had been accepted to a university, and then they had to withdraw the acceptance because of the loss of grant funds. And so I am deeply worried about how certain science projects, which are longitudinal, are going to get cut off. And whatever we can do, each situation is different. But be bold, do not be embarrassed, do not be apologetic, stand up for what we're in favor of.
I couldn't agree with you more. I had breakfast last week with a young Black woman who has a fellowship at NIH, pre-doc fellowship, brilliant woman working on genetic research. And it's a 2-year fellowship. And I really came away from that wondering if the second year will happen for the very same reason.
Yeah.
That kind of, and that's NIH. So she was telling the tales of NIH, but just to see that, I think is just extraordinary. I also just want to welcome Sheila Curran from Ireland, who's with us, unfortunately a victim of change. But the head schools of Mary Daly, of course, are a great example. And if I may say so, I like to think that Water and groups like ours are also examples of this kind of pedagogy that is out there. We do everything we can day and night to bring people like you and others to the public forum, to have Victoria and her colleague on abortion. We are unafraid. We are not putting our heads down. And it is a great privilege not to have to put your head down and have your livelihood cut off. I mean, that's really what's going on in many of those instances. People's livelihoods will be cut off. And we're both old enough and seasoned enough to have the privilege we can spend. And we, in my view, are about that here at Water more intensely and more expansively than ever before in our history. And so I'm happy to have you reiterate that in your own remarks. I'm going to turn to Donna, but before I do, is anybody else who hasn't had a chance to speak wanting to make a comment? And then I'll go to you, Donna, since you've had an opportunity.
I know that I have had a chance to speak, but I just want to say that I was very impressed with some of the work that Wed and Magdalena had done in their lives in terms of this teaching, and that they represent a different generation here. So if they are willing to raise their hand after Donna, I would love for that story to be more public.
That's
before Donna, let me also point out, Mary, there's a Deb has a question in the chat, and I
Oh,
noticed
okay.
it's still on.
Great.
So
I'll take care of that while
that's
Donna
to you,
gets that.
Jennifer.
Yeah.
So Mary,
Mhm.
back to you.
Just
thank you,
two
Deb.
things. First, as an example of what you just said, Jennifer, about groups holding town halls, we have the editor of the Plain Dealer here posts a chat every day, and
Very
he
good.
invited people to say if they'd be interested in coming together. 700 people responded, and they're going to have a forum for people who are interested in talking about the current situation. The other thing is that I just read something online yesterday about Georgetown University, and that the president of the law school had written a letter in response to the shutdown and the threats against the colleges and universities. And he basically was lifting his finger and saying, you can't do that. It's against the Constitution, and we will not stand for that. So, kind of have a nice life. But,
Just
that we're going to, I don't know whether they'll file a lawsuit or whatever, but, it's the first response that I've heard that has been sensible regarding what they're trying to do.
Thank you. And also to reiterate, Jennifer, what you said about the town hall meetings being held in adjacent districts that was reported last night. I do think that's just a fabulous technique, and that people really are crossing all kinds of boundaries and borders to present resistance. From Deb, living in Virginia, where all the true history is being silenced, can you give me the names of the 2 lesbians who came to Virginia to teach? Thank you for being so enthusiastic and specific in a history I was not aware of. Shalom. And if you want, we can put those names in the chat.
Yeah, I sent them to her privately, but I'll put it out here for everybody. Sally, Holly, and Carolyn Putnam. And Sally Holly is buried here at Mount Hope Cemetery, and anyone from upstate New York, the Holly name might sound familiar, and that's because her father, Myron Holly, was also an abolitionist, and he was one of the people who helped to build the Erie Canal. He was one of the big planners on that. So that
Great.
is, and so yeah, she is buried here, and they have banners of the famous people who are buried in that cemetery, which is right down the street from where my mom is now. So
That's great. Well, we'll be up this summer. We go every summer to that section of the world, and we'll be up in Syracuse. And we do get ourselves over to Seneca Falls, don't we, Diane? Where my family has a bit of interesting history. So let us turn to other comments or questions, or maybe to Magdalena and Wed, if you want to say something about your work. Magdalena, especially your work teaching in Morocco, and Wed, some things that you're thinking about. Because Jennifer's right, your generation is key. I was thrilled, Jennifer, with those stories of the following succeeding generations and how the ripple effect takes place. And so, Magdalena, Wed?
I mean, that's one of the reasons we are at Water, to learn from previous generations and to continue the work you started, or you continued, because it started way before you as well. If you look to Europe and especially Germany, it's the same thing. Education departments are not permitting a gender neutral language anymore and stuff like that. So we're kind of trying to learn and gather ideas and starting points on where we can start and where we can continue the work that we see here in all of our Zoom meetings with all of the people that inspire us so much.
Thank you. Wed, did you want to add a comment?
No, I think Magdalena put it very well already.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and they are, as I said the other day on the program, without them, we'd be scratching in the sand with a stick, as they bring so much to us, particularly in terms of technology skills and new perspectives, and of course, an international dimension to our work. So we're very fortunate to have had 2 German students last year and the year before who spent a year with us. Sheila Curran's hand is up in Ireland. Go ahead, Sheila.
I'm really sorry. It was the time difference got me, I really thought it was a different time. But anyway, two things I just wanted to say when you were speaking, Jennifer, about whether it's hedge schools in Ireland, but it's about trying to find ways out of no ways. And I've seen that more in Latin America than I did see in Ireland in recent times. And the other thing, I have a friend teaching in a state university in Illinois, and who teaches human rights and a lot of kind of, I suppose, alternative history. And just what the state university has done to silence those voices is really scary, because they are so afraid. And because it's a state-run university, it's even more so difficult for somebody that are trying to find ways around that, and they are trying to have alternative hubs. But the problem is also that they are being infiltrated by others who report them, because it is a very divided university, and that's scary to me because, I didn't think I'd witnessed that. I know the place well, and I lived in Chicago for a number of years myself. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, as an Irish woman, where my leader of my country is actually in Washington, D.C., who's just met with Mr. Trump and trying to do the art of diplomacy, has been really scary for us in different ways. Two things, because of our position on anti-war, particularly in relation to Israel-Palestine and the complexities that that has involved for us as an island, because we are seen very much as anti-Semitic, and that has not been the case, but because we are pro-Palestinian, we've been labelled as anti-Semitic throughout the US, and particularly with Irish ancestry people who are very much pro-Israel. So that is one complication that has evolved here as a very difficult space. And the other thing is about trying to use a voice that is about democracy, human rights, and freedom, and how that has, for the first time ever for an Irish state representative in going to the US, has been a very delicate and difficult positioning. So it's just how to use diplomacy in a way that isn't to fracture more division, but how scary it is that we here are so influenced and affected by what is happening in the US, and how it is beginning to impinge also in the lives of Irish people here, because it has divided families here because of people who have had their ancestry in the United States. So it's just to say that that ripple effect is very difficult. And while people use our peace process analysis sometimes, because we still don't have 100% peace in this country either, it is just how things become warped now in this discourse. So I just wanted to share that, because we're celebrating Patrick's Day and it's being used as a blanket in the US for another reason of division and divide. So we need the solidarity, and we always need to find ways out of no ways. And I like your phrase, we have to be bold and not silent.
Thank you,
One
Shane.
of thanks very much. Yeah, I hadn't been following that particular politics. It's really interesting, and trying to do diplomacy with Trump is, he's not playing that game. He's not. He doesn't engage by any rules, and I have found in these weeks a great deal of clarity from the fact that I know before the man speaks that I disagree with everything. Absolutely everything. And I don't like to practice dualism, but this is a moment in which we are finding this kind of block of unphilosophic thinking, which forms an absolute opposite to subtlety and to trying to understand what a real dialectic of freedom could be. And so I'm not, I don't know how to intervene on the international sphere there, but I've seen the same conversations from colleagues in India because of the way that the BJP has tried to silence dissent at the universities and has tried to align himself with Russia and with Trump. And so you see that these manipulations going on, and it starts to look like again, a bipolar world, but I think it's a very important principle that within each nation there are multiple perspectives. There's, there's no nation that is 100% behind these right-wing fools, right? And we have to keep remembering that. And I thinking too about, our friends in Canada, that it's very good to know that they know that some of us are trying, that it's not all Americans. And so anyway, that's my.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Jennifer. Let me simply acknowledge from the chat that Nora Jones is greeting us from Port Stanley in the Falkland Islands, or Islas Malvinas, as they're also known, these islands off the coast of Argentina. So that's a far away, most welcome greeting that we receive from you, Nora, and so glad you're here.
There's a hand up on my end, which is Peggy wants to speak. So I'm going to slide out here and let her come on screen.
Hey, Peggy.
Hi. Well,
So, yeah, there you are.
one of the things that came to my mind during some of the conversation is the idea of freedom of speech. I mean, we keep on going, oh yeah, and they were the party, that freedom of speech. And now it's obvious, of course, it was a lie. It was just their speech. Prudence Crandall insisted on being arrested. She knew how that would look. And if women of a certain age were willing to be arrested for free speech, and that started happening on and off all over the country, I can't imagine that wouldn't stir something, if it was your mother, your neighbor, and just, we could get arrested for using they, them, I mean, there could be ways that we could get arrested and, for nothing. And I don't know, just a thought, like, what can we do? And we talk about, we need movements, and just a thought that might be an interesting movement, the free speech movement.
Yeah, I've heard of that before.
Somewhere in Berkeley there was some talk of that once.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
I want to just close things off here, Jennifer, with a final question to you, unless anyone else has something absolutely pressing, but we've presumed so much on your time that I want to also draw us to a close. But I just wonder if you could say a few words about your new research that you're talking about, and this is again from that article in the GTU alum publication, the nature, art, and justice, the connection of nature, art, and justice. And as I read about that, that's where my understanding of you as a postmodern Renaissance woman, nature, art, and justice came from, was your own words of the work that you're doing in the future. So could you say something about that? And I know it may be derailed, and Dolores, forgive me, but it may be derailed for good reasons, because of the urgency of the moment. But I just wonder what you're working on for nature, art, and justice. What can you just say in 10 words or less what that's about at this point?
Sure. It's about the that if what we're fighting for is for human lives to be more free and more possible, then the next step to defining what we are for is what that looks like. And that what we are for then becomes a life that contains a great deal of beauty and insight, that has to have poetry, that has to have music, that has to have the natural world that gives us these things. And what we see in the natural world repeatedly is diversity. It's everywhere. Now, my love for lichens is because of their internal diversity. They are fungi, algae, and bacteria together in an arrangement that is beneficial to all partners. And in fact, they can't exist independently. So the word symbiosis is because of lichens. It was invented to describe them in the 19th century. So the internal diversity of nature is one side. The second side is the feminist side of, if we're going to say that we are in favor of humanity, we must have a full humanity that includes women and men, black and white, all genders, all sexualities, that the same diversity that we admire in nature, and I'm thinking here of Vandana Shiva and the horror of monoculture, that we don't want a monoculture, but that means we really have to invite all the voices. Obviously, it's somewhat inchoate right now because it's everything I've ever thought. But it is supposed to be about this, what is it we're for? What is it that we love, that makes us feel alive, that makes us more human? And that's not, I don't want it to be about our enemies. I'm not interested.
Well, on that happy note, let me simply say that I am extending to you officially and publicly not only a great deal of thanks for this event, but an invitation to come to us and talk about these new issues that are emerging, or the new combinations of them, as you wish, if that would be helpful in your writing process. And certainly when the book is done, plan on another Water Talk. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thanks everybody for being part of this. We'll get the notes and the video out to you, but I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. It's just really refreshing, challenging, insightful, informative, and I think most of all, hopeful in terms of how history can show us the way here, that we are not asked to do something that other people have not done before, and we can learn from what they have done. We can take their good example, and this is our work. So let's get on with it.